Agenda for today, and like I said, very excited about it. Better data for better decisions. We're going to explore how we use data to promote student success reforms. And we'll take a look at the new tool being put out by the nonprofit, the National Student Clearinghouse's tool called the Postsecondary Data Partnership, or PDP for short. My name is Charles Ansell. I'm the Vice President here for Research, Policy, and Advocacy at Complete College America under the leadership of my president, Yolanda Watson-Spiva, who will kick things off shortly. Just prior to joining CCA, I was the Chief Operating Officer for the Community College System of New Hampshire. And before that, I led student success efforts at the City Colleges of Chicago, where I'm proudly from and have lived for most of my life. In each role, I've overseen the implementation of data warehouses, data governance programs, and data and reporting software, so everyone could have the right data at the right times to make the right decisions. In prior roles, I actually was one of the first customers of the PDP, which really, does help provide strong enrollment, retention, completion, transfer, and course enrollment data to help push along student success reforms, and was very helpful where I've worked. So on a personal level, that's another reason I'm very excited for this session. So with that, I'm going to shut up in a second, turn it over to our panelists. But on this agenda here, we'll have our panelists each present on data and its significance to student success reforms before going into a demo of the PDP, and then breakout sessions, a reconvening, and a closeout. I would like each presenter to turn it over to the next panelist, if you don't mind, just to keep things a smooth flow between our remarks. And so with that, without further ado, I'll turn it over to President Yolanda Watson-Spiva.
Thank you so much, Charles. Again, I'm Yolanda Watson-Spiva, and I have the sincere honor of serving as the president of Complete College America. For those of you who may not know who we are a nonprofit that was established in 2009, and we pride ourselves on being a bold national advocate for dramatically increasing college completion rates. And our goal is to close institutional performance gaps. So we put the onus and the burden on the institution and less of a focus on trying to fix students. We believe in working with state systems and institutions that we can partner with them to scale highly effective structural reforms. So we look at the structures and systems and policies at the institutional level and the state level that we believe will help to improve student success. Next slide, please. One of the things that CCA really prides itself on is being able to try to accomplish student success and college completion at scale. We have an alliance of 47 states, consortia, and regions, and they're represented here in blue and green on your screen. And so you could see that we believe in operating at scale in order to sort of proselytize the message around why student success is important and why focusing on institutional performance gaps is also important. We are nonpartisan in nature, and so we have commitments and agreements from governors of all different types of states, blue and red, and we help them to establish college completion plans and attainment, and also to establish attainment goals. And the ways that we help them to achieve those goals is through the implementation of the CCA strategies. We also have them to submit their college completion data so that we can also partner with them in holding themselves accountable for achieving those goals. Here's an example of just some of the feedback that we have gotten in the media in terms of the work of CCA. We've been known for our work on declaring war on remediation. We are staunch supporters of students finishing on time. We believe, of course, in trying to have students to have a plan when they go to college, putting purpose first in their higher education endeavors. And then there's also, you can see a highlight there with our partnership with the Thurgood Marshall College Fund and others, and then some outcomes data around college completion rates increasing based on the work by policy organizations like CCA. And I have to say that CCA does not do this work alone, so I want to pause for a second to thank the UNCF, SACSCOC, and the HBCU Frontier Set for being here with us today, because this work only gets accomplished through partnerships. CCA is great, but we are better together with other organizations. And another thing that's typically happened, I talked a little bit about Thurgood Marshall, and today, of course, we have UNCF on the call, but HBCUs have typically been left behind in a lot of the innovations that happened early on in the college completion movement. And we think this is an opportunity in partnering with you all today and going forward in having you to participate on the front end and position yourselves to better serve students and tell your unique stories of success by partnering with CCA and others on the call. So next slide, please. The way that CCA operates, I talked about our partnerships. We believe completely in having, collective impact sort of strategies, but also we're action oriented and we believe in being very bold. And so the way that we partner with our alliance of states and consortia that we showed on the couple of slides ago is that we operate based on policy. So that's state policy, but it's also institutional policy where we try to create the conditions for change. So first we have to create the ground. The ground has to be fertile for the change that we're trying to accomplish to get done. And once we partner with you, your institution and or your state to create the conditions for change. And a lot of times that looks like partnering with your leadership. It could be partnering with your governor's education policy advisors, the SHIO in your state higher education executive officer, or others to create the conditions. And then we also then partner with you on the strategy. So we also show you on the ground how to actually implement the change that we're endeavoring to embark upon. And so all of that is the through line toward college completion. But as you can see, it's undergirded by our advocacy, data, and research, and then it's overgirded by our equity. And so everything that we do is all in service of college completion, but also it's beyond completion, right? So it's also about what those employment sector outcomes look like in service of the ultimate highest goal being about social mobility for students of color, for students who have been historically marginalized and historically minoritized. It's about economic opportunity for those students. And ultimately, that's in service of a racial justice agenda. And so CCA is not operating in silos in terms of the work that we do. We work in partnership, but we understand that this model that we've created is a model that we believe has served us very well in terms of being able to prove that what we're saying is important because of the data and the research that we have behind us, being able to share those data with the states and then to hold them accountable for what they say they want to achieve in terms of completion. We advocate on their behalves in partnership for the agendas that they have in their particular states. And then we also, of course, want to have a spotlight on equity. And so we want to make sure that as we disaggregate the data, we're able to show where there may be equity gaps that need to be filled and highlight that as a part of the college completion plan or the attainment goals that that state has. And so again, this model is a demonstration of all that I've just said. Next slide, please. So Charles mentioned earlier in the call about having the right data at the right time. And that's essentially what we believe this partnership is really about. Essentially, as you can see, what we've done on this slide is for those of you who are familiar with the game changers and you've known our strategies over time have morphed, and they're typically tend to be about 5 game changers at a time. So the names may have changed, but the CCA strategies are essentially those that are on the far right side of your screen. And so we're talking about working with returning adults, career advising, 15 to finish, all of those different names for the strategies that CCA has implemented over time. What we wanted to show you on this slide is that having the right data at the right time is really about being able to track with metrics. And so you see the PDP metrics, that's the post-secondary data partnership. We're trying to show you here that there's an alignment between our strategies at CCA, the National Student Clearinghouse's PDP metrics, right? And how it will help you to really track all of the strategies that CCA helps you to implement on the ground towards your college completion goals. And then what you see in the colored boxes on the far right are the alignment to our 4 pillars of purpose, structure, momentum, and support. And so what we've done is to try to overlay and show alignment between partnering with the PDP is not an additional set of body of work. It really is about alignment of the work that you're already doing. All of you are working on enrollment, credit accumulation. These are things you're interested in and you're tracking, and you're trying to make sure that students have purpose, momentum, the structures for success and support. And so all of these things we've overlaid for you, and we show you how, in partnership with CCA and NSC and others, how you can have results on multiple student types through PDP data. You can also have information about transfer activity, but you also have a comprehensive data set to keep up with the pace of your work. As we know, the pace has actually accelerated because of the pandemic, students not being on campus, having more students in some cases coming in, sometimes a drop in enrollment, and trying to figure out how you can ramp that up. You're going to need real-time data at the right time in order to make immediate decisions. And so we believe that's very important. Thank you. Next slide, please. And as we're operating on very tight budgets, it's very important that we have something that helps us solve solutions without really adding to adding increases to our budget. And so this slide talks about the fact that there are pretty much about 5, there are lots more than 5, but we boil them down to 5 major data access challenges around a lack of consistency in the third-party data submission templates, right? So we have to submit to multiple parties, and then there's not consistency around what we have to submit, right? So that's tough for anybody that's in institutional research, right? Or institutional effectiveness. The existing benchmarks in IPEDS, of course, use lagging indicators, right? So one of the things we're trying to do is, one, have a single point of submission to NSC for CCA and other organizations. So while you're submitting your data to CCA and NSC, it will inform the PDP, and I apologize for all of these abbreviations, but for National Student Clearinghouse, Complete College America, and the Postsecondary Data Partnership. We also want to make sure that because of the IPEDS using lagging indicators, that these metrics line up with student success reforms. We have difficulty in reporting and visualizing these leading data indicators, so we use filterable visual dashboards for you to make executive level decision making. There are also national metrics. A lot of times we know they exclude many students, and you need information about all of your students and their transfer activity, not just the first-time full-time starters. And then lastly, we know that a major data access challenge point is that the current economic crisis is posing more threats to student success. And so, of course, we know that better data will lead to better decisions and allow you to be responsive in how you're developing solutions for your students. Next slide, please. So if you want to learn more about the PDP, feel free to join us at completecollege.org/PDP. And if you set up a profile at completecollege.org, it will allow you to get access to all sorts of tools. We have lots of free tools and information that are on the CCA website. The profile will help you get information pushed out to you, have access to our webinars, et cetera. And what you should know is that we also have agreements with the various organizations to make sure, and Charles will probably talk about this in terms of how much the PDP costs, but our goal is to make a low cost solution for you in terms of being able to engage with the PDP. And that's going to be in partnership with SACSCOC, NSC, and CCA. So I'll turn it over to Ed Smith-Lewis for further guidance and information. Thank you all for joining us today.
Yes, thank you, Yolanda. Really excited to be here and to speak to this audience. My name is Ed Smith-Lewis. I'm the Executive Director of UNCF's Institute for Capacity Building, where we're focused on one primary objective, and that's building the resiliency of our historically Black colleges as well as predominantly Black institutions. We define resiliency as the ability for the institution to achieve success today while future-proofing its operations for tomorrow. That resiliency sits at the intersection of 3 core activities, one of which will heavily align to today's conversation. The first is what we call institutional effectiveness. And we think of that as the throughput. How many students in, how many students out, and what kind of experience does your institution provide for them along the way? It is going to be tools like the PDP that are going to help our institutions be more targeted as we support a changing demographic and a variety of different students and their needs on campuses. The second area is what we call academic competitiveness. There, we're focused explicitly with our faculty and our academic side of the house to understand how can we enhance curriculum to deliver against 21st century workforce needs. We think about curriculum as both the pedagogy, how our institutions teach our students, as well as the content, what they teach their students. And then the third area is financial viability. There, it's all around the business model. How do we ensure that our institutions are not only sustainable today, but positioning themselves to thrive in the future? I really appreciate the invite to this conversation today because in 2015, UNCF launched something we call the Career Pathways Initiative. The Career Pathways Initiative had two primary objectives: increase student success while improving graduate career outcomes. We partnered with 24 institutions, sets of public and private HBCUs, as well as a PBI. We're now in our fourth year of that work, and I'm happy to say that we're seeing progress across the board on the metrics that we're tracking. And those metrics tend to be heavily aligned with iPads in a way that I want to spend a little time and talk about the significance of data. Yolanda already said it, and a few others have mentioned it, and you may even have heard that sort of data is the currency of the future. Here within the Institute of Capacity Building, we know that currency is needed today. When we first launched that Career Pathways Initiative and we reached out to over 81 public and private HBCUs and PBIs, we had about 72 apply to that opportunity. One of the requirements of that application was for institutions to submit historical, what we call benchmark data. If we were to select institutions based off of their ability to provide the data we hope that they would give us, we would have selected 0 institutions in the process. As we started that project, and our leader, Dr. Michael Lomax at the time said, well, let's work with them to resolve that. And over the course of the last 3 years, instead of identifying data that we ideally wanted to tell that story, many of the data Yolanda showed you on the slide before is related to the PDP around student progression, right? Credit accumulation, right? 2-year retention, year-over-year retention. These data points are extremely valuable, but what we realized very quickly is that the majority of the institutions we sought to work with use data for compliance. And that compliance tends to align to what is needed for iPads to ensure that we receive federal funding. And while that's extremely important, and we want to make sure that our institutions continue to do that, we know that that data is not sufficient. As we continue to think about institutional transformation as an integrated approach that requires all aspects of the institution working in concert, it will take dashboards like the one created for you by the PDP to ensure that all stakeholders on your campus are actively aware and actively thinking about how to improve those numbers. I want to give one example of how this worked in our project with the Career Pathways Initiative. One of the key data points of the fidelity of our work was around graduate career outcomes. Now, you guys know data on campus is hard to get, let alone data that reflects what happens to students after they leave campus. Well, when we reached out to our institutions and we said, hey, how are you tracking your student data after they graduate? Many said, oh, well, it depends on the department, or it depends on the person or the individual or the Excel file or the process that someone had launched, in a way that there was very little, number one, fidelity to the data that was presented. Number two, an infrastructure that was replicable, where we could produce the same numbers year over year. And number three, depending on the day or the time of the year, if a person was not in place to complete that work, it did not happen. Now, UNCF, understanding that there are many limitations at our institutions, we recognize that HBCUs are historically under-resourced and therefore underfunded today. And oftentimes when you're underfunded, we have individuals with multiple hats on. I suspect many of our IR people on the call today, or any of you, have multiple commas in your job description. And so what we said is, well, how can we reduce the burden To reduce the burden of getting graduate career outcomes, UNC have invested over $650,000 to get 15 years of longitudinal career outcome data for 20 of the 24 institutions. Again, because you got to opt in, was not mandatory. That amount of resources to get that data, while critical, is not sustainable. What we appreciate about opportunities that CCA is presenting, and like the PDP, is number one, fidelity is resolved, right? You as an institution, by partnering in the PDP, will understand what the data definitions are, how to submit that data, mostly in a simple student identified way, right? But all the fidelity that goes with analyzing your data is taken out. Number two, infrastructure. The infrastructure is built such that institutions can resolve those concerns that they have and the limitations that you may even have in your data systems, right? Some people say bad data in, bad data out. The great thing about processes like this is we can work with the data that you have. And so as institutions, that infrastructure is provided when your institution may not have the capability, capacity, and or financial resources to invest in that. And finally, personnel. Once your institution signs up to be a part of the PDP, the process is replicable. The resources are there to help your institution sustain those efforts over time. And the reality, ultimately, is that as you participate in this, not only are you going to get quality data, but your ability to benchmark your data to other institutions and how their outcomes is going to inform your continuous improvement practices. Now, I could have come here and talked all day about the limitations of data on our campuses and the problems that we have with personnel, et cetera. But my number one goal here today is to say the PDP is a real opportunity for our institutions, and I appreciate CCA's focus on it, not to mention their HBCU leadership, to get HBCUs involved in this conversation. One of the things that I know is fearful for our institutions is what happens to the data if it's in the wrong hands. The reality is we are moving towards more accountability as it relates to student outcomes, both in terms of retention and progression, and ultimately what happens after graduation. And unless we build the muscle to understand that data today, we will lose in the future. I want to implore you, as you're thinking about this for your institution and whether this is the right opportunity, that you not only reach out to the CCA team and their numerous graduates of HBCUs, but also think about reaching out to organizations like Thurgood Marshall and UNCF. We will tell you the real story, and I'll tell you myself within the Institute for Capacity Building, if we had the capacity currently on staff to deliver a PDP project, we will be all over this. But instead, we really want to partner with an organization like CCA and get our institutions onboarded. This work will not only benefit student success, and as you'll hear from my colleague Godfrey as I wrap up my comments now, it'll also help you with compliance and with accreditation, because you will have the data that you need to make the case for your institution and the success that you're providing for your students. With that, I'm open to any questions from any of our attendees, and feel free to reach out to me after this event if you really want to talk about the importance of the PDP. Thank you again, Yolanda and CCA, for inviting UNCF to this conversation, and I'll turn it over to Godfrey Noel at SACS.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I'm Godfrey Fujino, Coordinator of Training and Research here at SACSCOC, and we're delighted to be a part of this opportunity and talk to you about what it brings to the table and the benefits for you. I'm going to go ahead and, is it okay if I share my screen? I'm going to try to do that now, just to have my slides up. Okay. Let's switch. Okay, so basically, as everybody has been talking about, we're really excited about this. So one of the reasons we're really excited about this here at SACSCOC, we're really all about student success, which is the only reason that all the accreditation standards exist. We want to make sure that institutions are properly positioned to support student success as much as possible. So any standard in the commission is focused ultimately on that. So that's part of the SACSCOC mission. Another aspect of SACSCOC and student success is that we really focus as an organization on evidence-based approaches to student success. So in other words, that when it comes to finding out, okay, what can we do as an organization or as institutions for student success, we really encourage and ask, and in fact require that institutions have an evidence-based approach. And this is one of the reasons that we're so excited about the PDP, because the coverage, the data that it looks at, the information that it presents really empowers you as an institution to make evidence-based approaches to student success. And so when it comes to accreditation, the PDP is a really wonderful thing. So first of all, you can use it. It can directly or indirectly support you on all accreditation standards, because ultimately many of the accreditation standards, ultimately, as I said, look at what is the impact this is having on students. And so no matter what you're doing at the institution, you ultimately want to be able to demonstrate that it's benefiting students. But there are two sections in particular where the PDP shines and can potentially be a huge benefit to your institution. Section 7 on institutional planning and effectiveness. This is one of the critical standards here at the commission. And what it focuses on, as you know, is how good is your institution doing at the planning process and effective in the teaching and learning process. One of the standards that the PDP is especially helpful on is 7.2, the QEP, because as you know, standard 7.2 asks that you choose a QEP topic for institutions in the Southern region, that asks that you choose a QEP topic based on evidence and data, and that it must focus on student learning outcomes or student success. One of the best ways, in fact, probably the only way to do it, is with data and information. And the PDP, we like to think of it as sort of like turning on the light in a dimly lit room, so that you go from having to guess about decisions or not having a high level of clarity to being able to zero in. Complete College America said in one of their flyers, something to the effect of, when you don't have time to make a bad decision. And we all know the pressures on us now with the pandemic, with so much going on, so many challenges. It's really important to be very, very precise in decision making. And so it will really help with 7.2. And also with 8.1, student achievement. The PDP is extremely relevant to this, because one of the things, as you know, in the Southern region, we ask that institutions disaggregate their student achievement data. And the PDP, one of the things that it does extremely well is that it disaggregates data, so that now, instead of simply having a high level retention rate, and you might not be able to tell, hey, what's dragging down my retention rate? Where are the roadblocks? Well, when you disaggregate it, for example, one institution was able to find that, wow, our morning sections were having more of a problem than our evening sections. Well, it turned out the morning sections had your working adults in there, and surprise, surprise, algebra at 8 o'clock in the morning was not that exciting. So they had to make some changes there. But the fact of the matter is that the PDP provides you with so much insight into the factors that are playing a part in your student success dynamics on your campus. So that's one of the reasons we're excited about it. And one of the things we're doing many things to support usage and uptake of the PDP here at SACSCOC. We have created the Insight Data Equity Academy. And what this does is that we are providing you with wraparound services to support you should you sign up for the PDP. And there are several services. Number one, we have contracted with an awesome organization called Achieving the Dream, which in fact, provides a bumper-to-bumper PDP course. It's a PDP accelerator course, which covers everything from the technical aspects of submitting the data to utilizing the data on your campus and creating a data-driven culture. It's really an awesome course. It starts here. The next section starts on March 15th, and it runs 9 weeks, and that course is free of charge to you. We are providing that if you decide to join Insight Data Equity Academy IDEA. We have webinars with National Student Clearinghouse individuals, PDP individuals from institutions who have submitted data. And I mean, it's a wonderful thing that we'll be providing these webinars to help support you in the process, and most importantly, answer your questions and make sure that you're able to use the PDP at your institution, which is one of the things that we're big on in the data industry now, because there's a deluge of data, but how do I use it and what do I do with it? So we're also creating collegiate peer groups. We're partnering in this effort with the Northwest Commission on Colleges and Universities, and we're in the process of starting up peer groups and interest groups amongst institutions so that institutions can share ideas, not just on using the, not just on submitting data to the PDP, but also how to use that to drive student success at your institution. And then we'll have professional development and presentations at our conferences, train the trainer events. So this is just a really important part of your institution developing the skill set necessary to use the PDP effectively. And finally, and importantly, we are excited to announce a financial subsidy, $2,000 the first year, $1,000 the second year, to support you in this, to put towards the PDP fee. So we are just really excited at the commission about this, because as Ed was talking about, you have not just individuals that are wearing multiple hats, but individuals at institutions where you don't have a ton of resources. You can't hire data analytics teams and get a big data server with IBM Watson feeding you data. But you will be a rock star on your campus if you can tell them the morning students don't like algebra. That's what's holding us back. So, but we're excited about it, and I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'll turn it over back to Charles. Thank you so much.
Excellent. And I'm actually going to go ahead and toss it over to Kathy Thompson.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, CCA, for the invitation to participate in this very important discussion around the PDP. For those of you who are not familiar with the Frontier Set, I am the Frontier Set HBCU Intermediary. We work with 6 HBCUs. The Frontier Set is a diverse group of 29 post-secondary institutions and 2 state systems identified by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation as leaders in transformation change that accelerates degree attainment. The HBCU Intermediary team and I that I lead recognize the potential of the 6 Frontier Set HBCUs in the use of the post-secondary data partnership by launching data governance. The 6 HBCUs you see on the screen, they have been working with the PDP now for about 4 years. The data governance, we believe, will help the HBCUs to build a more comprehensive data sets and create centralized reporting functions to help facilitate a data warehouse, predictive analytics, and organization-wise use of the PDP and dashboards. Joining me today is Robert Bailey, our data governance lead, and Lillian Williams. I'm going to now defer to Robert to explain more about our data governance project. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Kathy, for giving me this opportunity to speak to all of our colleagues present today about our data governance program. One second. So we wanted to take an approach, a more practical approach with assisting some of our HBCU institutions to implementing a data governance program within their respective campuses. My background being in institutional research, as well as IT, has afforded me opportunities to be involved with not only data-driven conversations, but also accreditation-driven conversations as well. And there's no better way to approach this than treating every day, so similarly like how we treat every day as an assessment day, treating every day as an opportunity to get a handle on the data that's absolutely critical for making well-informed decisions within these campuses. So we partner with, we're currently partnering with 2 of our HBCUs with a test program to get them started and have them begin the conversations amongst themselves and encouraging and fostering that collaboration so that the right hand knows what the left hand is doing. And similarly to what was mentioned earlier, if there are reports or data that's available for somebody within the organization to use and put to good use, it's made available to them. So we look at some of the universal goals of a data governance program as outlined by the Data Governance Institute. Some of them involve enabling better decision-making, reducing operational friction, protecting the needs of data stakeholders, training management and staff to adopt common approaches to data issues, building standard and repeatable processes, reducing costs, and increase effectiveness through coordination of efforts. And what I consider one of the priorities is ensuring transparency of the processes. Now, in most instances, when you have discussions on campus, it all comes down to a mix-up of definitions. And sometimes data governance can be confused with data quality. And I want to highlight this particular slide, whereas data quality, we look at as being the degree to which data is accurate, complete, timely, and consistent with all requirements and business rules, as opposed to data governance, which is a component of institutional governance that is responsible for the exercise of authority, control, and shared decision-making over the management of institutional data assets. And while we have this graphic here that shows a comparison between the two as it relates to water, we also want you to think of this from a different perspective. If you take auditing and accounting, for an example, within various organizations, you have auditors and controllers that set the rules for the management of financial assets. Similarly, a well-implemented data governance program sets the rules for the management of those data assets. So we move on to a few of the questions that we use in our discussions, our early discussions with these institutions, to get a sense of where they are when we're starting our initial assessment of data governance readiness within an institution. So if you sat in a meeting, and if any of these questions were to be posed to you, does your organization struggle with siloed data? Do you see data quality issues that specifically impact your ability to make decisions? And depending on who you're asked, this is a good one. Do you observe a variance in the same data points? Or are you concerned about the relaxed security or there being too many hands in the cookie jar? If you don't have any issues with any of these topics that were just addressed, then by all means, you have certainly solved the problem that most institutions are facing. And if that is the case, please be sure to email us and let us know how it is that you got there. So this is a pretty much a brief synopsis of some of the things that we're trying to engage our schools with as it relates to the data governance within their campuses. I want to go back to the first slide, particularly because we've come up with this as a result of our repeated conversations. Formalize, document, and communicate. While we're attempting to implement this practical approach to data governance, because we all know that along the way we can get bogged down with the countless surveys and the testing and the interviews and stuff to see if we're ready for something. We want to make sure that this approach that we're helping our institutions with sticks this time. A number of them have stated that they've tried over and over to stand up a robust data governance program, but somewhere along the way, if it's a leadership change or something else comes along the way that takes a priority, like reaffirmation of accreditation, it kind of throws them off track. So what we're trying to get them to realize is this doesn't have to be as complicated as it normally turns out to be. What you're actually doing with this approach is formalizing processes that you probably already have going on in between those silos. So as data discrepancies come up between institutional research and enrollment management, there's a phone call, there's a connection that takes place where these data stewards or data owners get together and hash out issues and variances within the data so that some form of validation can take place so that work can get done. We want schools to document those processes. So in conjunction with another one of our initiatives, process mapping, we want to ensure that standard processes are solidified so that everybody within the organization knows exactly how each moving part fits into the overall project. And finally, communicate. There's nothing worse than having a robust data platform like the dashboards that are prepared for our institutions through the PDP, and nobody knows about them or nobody knows how to use them. So we want to build that transparency and allow our institutions, our decision makers to know this is available to you with the proper access controls in place. You will have access to the timely data that you can use to make informed decisions within your respective areas. And with that, I will turn it back over to Kathy.
We certainly welcome questions, and someone in the chat asked about how to connect. Well, we are in the process of developing a data governance toolkit. So it is our goal to scale this, and we ask you to stay tuned. Thank you.
Excellent. So with that, we've had a lot of contextualization around the PDP, which is great, talking through all that's required technically to be able to use data to inform what you need to do, and going through such things as the data governance program and how to handle information overload for decision support purposes. I'm now really excited, I could even say very excited, to turn it over to Ken McVeary from the National Student Clearinghouse to go ahead and start demoing the PDP itself. So we can know what we're looking at and talking about in depth. So go ahead, Ken. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. And I'm very happy to be here with all of you guys today. I don't know if I've ever done a presentation where this many people have hyped up the PDP prior to me actually talking. So that's we're in brand new territory for me. But I am excited to talk to you all about the Postsecondary Data Partnership, and really, I think back to one of Yolanda's original points. For me, having left higher ed after 20 years, it's exciting to work on this project as part of the National Student Clearinghouse, because I very much see it as the right service at the right time that can really help institutions face a lot of the challenges and pressures that they're currently facing. So what exactly is a Postsecondary Data Partnership? It's essentially a data collection that institutions decide to participate in. And then from that information they give the clearinghouse, we give you back two very powerful analytics tools that you can utilize. One's going to be a Tableau-powered dashboard, and the other is going to be an analysis ready file. And the idea behind it is we're going to give you hopefully back better data than you've utilized before, because it goes beyond that iPads, which is all too often that first time full-time fall, right? And so we want to be able to give you information about your students, regardless of the term they start, regardless of whether they're transfers, and really help you capture a much more comprehensive picture of your student body. So more comprehensive data, the easier analysis and insight tools that just reference, a potential way to have some centralized reporting, and ideally better visualizations that can help you digest the data itself. And before jumping into the demo, I just want to give you all a quick type of contextualization of who's all involved in this initiative, why so many people have been talking about it. And really, the PDP at this point was developed as this nexus level platform where we're going to take information from schools all over the country nationally. It comes through the clearinghouse, and we're going to be able to give out all these powerful tools, not just to the individual institutions, but also to some of these additional interested parties. So we've got institutions and state systems involved, various associations and organizations, both national and regional student success initiatives, research policy groups, and foundations, all of whom are really vested in moving the needle around student success and improved outcomes. What you see on your screen currently is a list of our current partners. And when we say post-secondary data partnership, that's what we mean, that this is a partnership, not just with the institutions, but also with these various entities like SACSCOC, Complete College America on the call today. And what I find fascinating is that this was actually not just born out of the clearinghouse's sort of vision. When looking at all the various sort of educational reform and stumbling blocks that exist for our students in today's world, IHEP, the Institute for Higher Education Policy, took over a decade's worth of data and research and developed this new metrics framework around student success. And you sort of see some of the key aspects of that being around access, progress, and completion. And even once they created this metrics framework, though, there wasn't a way for us to sort of operationalize this as an industry for institutions. And so some of the thought leaders in our industry essentially approached the clearinghouse and said, hey, you are an educational nonprofit that have been working with institutions nationally for over 25 years now. Like everyone trusts you with the data that they provide. Is this something that you would be interested in? Could you all take these types of metrics and build out a data collection system and provide back some type of analytics tool that actually empowers institutions to pay attention to these types of metrics and make sort of systemic improvements? Obviously, we said yes, and we've been building out the PDP now for just over 3 years, and really have only started rolling it out to the greater higher education ecosystem, I'd say, in the past 9 months. And one of the things that I mentioned IHEP is that the PDP really aligns with those student success metrics, right? Some people have talked about the more traditional lagging indicators, right? Persistence, outcomes over time, transfer out information. And those are still very important, and we want to honor that. But it's really hard to move the needle on student success when your students have already walked with their feet, right? When they've already had to leave your institution for whatever reason. So we wanted to combine that with those leading indicators that came out of IHEP, these early momentum metrics around credit accumulation rate, credit completion ratio, and gateway course completion, to give you a better line of sight so that you can take action while your students are still enrolled. So with that, I'm actually going to switch screens here and pull up a dashboard view for you all. Give me 1 second while this spools up. So if you were to participate in the PDP, you would submit this information to us, and then we would give you access back to these types of dashboards. In addition to creating a more comprehensive picture of your students and your campuses, one of the neat features about this, I think, is it also empowers your entire campus if you want to have access to all these dashboards. So in other words, historically, data analytics and really, as someone hit on it earlier about being more about compliance, has traditionally lived in the institutional research office. And that oftentimes creates these choke points, right, of all these requests that they get from administrative leadership to run reports. With these dashboards, you can provide access to this to anyone else in your campus if you want. If you would like to provide it to your entire cabinet, to your student success or retention committees, you could do that as well. And really what that does is increases, data literacy and data democratization of getting people to have discussions around the same metrics at the same time. So what I need to do right now is have that thing go away so I can take a look at something. So high level overview, we have some big picture dashboards around executive summary and enrollment. We have these early momentum metrics I talked about, and then these more traditional outcomes over time. If I open up something like Gateway Course Completion, one of these early momentum metrics, this wants to spool up for me. When you receive these things, you're going to get them all with your preloaded aggregate data that you've submitted to the clearinghouse. I'm going to walk you through just real quickly how they are structured and some functionality pieces, and then I'll walk you through a brief use case of how we're seeing some of our institutions, our early adopters, use these things. They're all built the same way. They're all built in this 4-quadrant build. They're meant to be read left to right, top to bottom. One of the great things about this is that even if you don't know why Gateway Course Completion is important, there are these prompt questions that can help start guiding your inquiries. And if you need additional help beyond that, there's several tabs across the top. One of them is a dashboard guide that you can click over to, and it provides you a much more in-depth orientation to each dashboard that you can open up. And that's a really great resource to be able to lean on while you're learning to sort of navigate the dashboards. In addition to that, these being built in Tableau, it has this neat feature that anywhere where there's data, right, you can hover over it and a pop-up box is going to appear and it's going to show you and tell you the important things you're looking at. In this particular case, I'm looking at over 5,000 students required to take a gateway course in math or English. Of those roughly 5,000, less than 1,000 completed for a completion percentage of 18%. Just so that you know, everything we're looking at today is test data. It's built just for this sort of demo environment. And the particular one that I have open was built out for 2-year institutions. And I'll point out a couple idiosyncrasies there for when they might apply to 4-year institutions. So all of this is just your aggregate information around gateway course completion. But if I draw your attention across the top, you have all these different filters here that you can start slicing and dicing the information by. So if you wanted to drill down to a very specific cohort, you could do that. One of the things I should mention at this point is that when you submit data the first time for the PDP, we ask that you are submitting 3 to 5 years worth of historic data. That way, the first time you open the dashboards, you're going to be able to pay attention to trend lines, right? And so that's really important to be able to get use out of it right away. But if you want to drill down to a very specific cohort year, you could do that. The term that those students enrolled in, right? The type of credential type they're seeking. And again, if this were a 4-year institution, you would see baccalaureate there listed as well. Enrollment type, are they first time or transfer in, right? Attendance, are they full-time, part-time? Do you have any students enrolled that previously had done some dual or summer enrollment work at your institution? Age group, a couple different ranges to select from. Race, ethnicity, multiple variables to choose from. You can do it by gender, by Pell Grant status, first generation status. GPA range also has a multi-select functionality. So if I real quickly wanted to look at just my students who are achieving a 2.0 and below, apply that and see how they're faring relative to gateway course completion. You can see in that same year, it was 18% before, and now it's dropped down to 4, right? You could additionally do it by, are they college ready in math or English, as your institution defines it? And this particular dashboard has one additional filter around gateway course completion, where they're required to take only English, math only, or both math and English. Additionally, one of the functional pieces I want to point out is this dimension tab over here. So this drop-down menu, when I pull this down, what you're very quickly going to see are all the same global filters you just saw before, right? Again, right now, the default is overall. That's your entire aggregate information. But if I wanted to start looking at this, the difference between the dimension and the filters is how it affects and holds what you're looking at in the dashboards. So if, for example, I wanted to look at this just by gateway status, right? This is now going to split this out by those that were only required to take English, those are only required to take math, or those math and English. And so it's going to hold gateway status as the primary thing that I'm exploring in my data dive here. But in addition to that, if I wanted to layer on various intersectional characteristics, I could do that by adding these additional filters up here. So this top right typically talks about their positive percent sort of gateway completion. And then down here, you typically see the converse in a bar graph that's oftentimes we refer to as sort of a heat map of where students are not completing. So it's really essentially the inverse of this top right. And the bottom right down here tends to hold a larger picture view, right? So I mentioned that 18% before. I was on that 16, 17 year. And over here, we're looking at the total, right? So that 81.9 plus that 18.1 gets your 100%. And I want to leave this up because I want to talk briefly about how we're seeing many institutions try to look at this. So if I go down here, right, this 14, 15, 16 range of years, with so much educational reform having taken place in the past 5 to 10 years, there's been a lot of movement, right? And so I look at this, even though it's test data, I see this big bump here going from 18% to 25%, all around gateway course completion, improving gateway course completion, which is a hugely predictive indicator of ongoing student progress and completion. So this test school, right, they moved the needle. Clearly, they implemented some type of student success strategy here in the 17-18 year, and it carried through and was still seeing success the next year and even improved a little bit. And back when I sat on student success committees and retention committees, I'd see data like this. We would celebrate, whatever we had thought we had achieved, but really not being able to dig into the data much further beyond that. And so much of being able to tweak out student success is being able to identify who is benefiting from our initiatives and or who might be inadvertently getting left behind with that. So if I go back up to here, for example, and I wanted to get a little bit more involved in this, I'm seeing that, if I look at this English only cohort, right, or portion of this cohort, it's a very small number of that, roughly 5,500 for 146, and they completed a fairly good rate at 60%, versus those who are required to take math only, okay, about shy of 800 students completed at 37%, but 4,500 students were required to take math and English, and they completed at 24%. But I really want to sort of focus on this large number down here. Also, not just because it's the largest number, but because it went from 12% to 24%. So it really jumped way beyond that average of 7%. And I want to understand that more. So now that I know that, I can then isolate math and English only. That orange line is now going to scale, so it's easier for your visualizations. And now I can go back to these dimensions and start understanding this a little bit further. So let's say I want to look at this, break this down by enrollment type. Again, it's just the students who are required to take math and English, right? Well, now we're starting to see, okay, well, whatever that student success strategy was, our first-time students clearly got a more significant lift, right, than our transfer-in students, right? What if I wanted to do it by attendance, full-time, part-time, and start understanding that? I'm starting to see, okay, well, clearly both full-time and part-time students benefited, but the full-time students benefited significantly more than our part-time students. I can go down to gender and do the same thing. And one of the things that I think is really interesting to note, and you see some unknown categories up here. If I wanted to clean that up in some way, shape, or form, I could go up here, click one of those additional filters. And what I find interesting is how much, the male and female really sort of paralleled one another for quite a long time. And even though both benefited, there seems to be a growing disparity between female and male. Well, now I can use a tool up here when I see a disparity called the subgroup gap analysis. I can click on that. It opens up a new window for me. I can populate the two values I want to compare, right? And so now I'm, again, seeing the same thing. Longitudinally, we're here on the vertical axis and percentage, breakdown here across the bottom. And really for these 3 years, that hovered right around sort of 3%. Up here, both males and females are now doing much better, but now we're seeing that there is a gap of 6.6% and now a gap of 8.4%. And sometimes we end up in our student success, implementations, end up with these various unintended consequences. And this type of ability to dig into various different subgroups, and you can do subgroup gap analysis based on any of the types of filters you see here, can really reveal some bigger pictures. And I think that's really important to institutions being able to see some of those things. One of the other dashboards I want to open up real quickly while we've got just a couple minutes of time are outcomes. Nonetheless, even though early momentum metrics are really important, the traditional sort of narrative around colleges and universities is how we're measured on these outcomes: retention, persistence, graduation rates, and the like. And so in here, I also think this dashboard provides a much more complete picture around student success, because that narrative oftentimes is, okay, well, your retention rate was 65%. Somehow that's interpreted as, hey, institution, you have failed 35% of your student body. And that's just simply not always the case, right? So if I'm looking at this, again, this is a demo built for 2 years, but the same information would pertain for if you were a 4-year institution, right? So here, because the data that goes into the PDP gets combined with the national data that we have on all students, basically 98% of all students nationally, their information comes through the clearinghouse by the way of enrollment reporting and degree verification reporting. And because your data is combined with that, we can report back to you in an aggregate sense whether your students are finding success even after they've left your institution. So if we go back a couple years here so that we can do this a little bit more forward-looking, right? This is the outcomes at the 2-year mark for a 2-year institution, right? For this cohort, 59% at the 2-year mark are still enrolled at that community college. At the 2-year mark, 5% have achieved an associate's degree, 27% aren't enrolled anywhere nationally, but now we can actually see that 4.3% have moved on and have enrolled at a 4-year institution, right? 3.4 have enrolled at another 2-year institution. And so I think it really helps paint a much greater picture around student, progress and completion. And again, we were just doing this just by its aggregate. You could additionally look at that and explore very quickly by any number of these characteristics and layer on as many of them simultaneously as you would like. While I could probably keep talking on and on about the dashboards, I want to say one more thing. And that's, we just released this past summer the capacity to add benchmarking to these dashboards. And so you can benchmark against any other PDP participating institution nationally. And when you you can benchmark on credit completion ratio, credit accumulation rate, outcomes over time, retention persistence, and transfer out information. Those are the 5 dashboards we currently make benchmarking available on. And when you go into benchmarking, this is just a screenshot, but your institution would be here on the left. And then you can also, through a selection of additional filters, identify groupings of institutions you want to be benchmarked against. So you could benchmark by state, you could benchmark by 4 years by other 4 years, or 2 years by other 2 years, by public-private, and by several additional Carnegie classifications, such as tribal serving or tribal colleges, Hispanic serving, and HBCUs as well. So in this particular screenshot, this institution is being benchmarked against 5 other schools. And the actual dashboards, you would at least get a drop-down menu would tell you, here are the names of the 5 schools you're being benchmarked against. All right, so if they don't seem like they're the most accurate comparison for you, you could go back into these filters and start to narrow that field as well. And so really the power of benchmarking is only going to get more and more robust as the PDP continues to take off. We've had over, as I said, we just started rolling this out to the greater higher education world almost a year ago now. And at that time, we were at about 200 and some institutions. And since that point, we've had over 200 institutions sign up since this summer alone. I think really with data, as someone said earlier, being the currency of the day, being able to get a line of sight of what's going on and have intelligent conversations around this type of objective information, that's easily digestible, can really help people think through how they are going about their student success and really trying to improve educational reform all around. That was just about the dashboards. The other thing I'm going to talk about very briefly, and then I will wrap this up, and that is the analysis ready file. The dashboards are one tool that institutions get, but institutions also get a couple different analysis ready file. One is a cohort-based analysis ready file, and that is built with personally identifiable information on it. And that's built on 1 row per student. It has all the same different data elements from the PDP data collection, as well as the derived metrics that we talked about. But what you can do with this is literally drill down to a student level of saying, identifying like, hey, these 10 students we need to have a conversation with them. Let's get their names to their student success coach or academic advisor and have a conversation with them, ideally while they're still enrolled, to figure out if we can develop some type of support plan around them, right? Or if you want to match them up to a predictive analytics tool your institution might be using, or if you want to look at, hey, I'd like to look at this, just this group of scholarship recipients, or this group of student athletes, right? That may not be pre-built into the filters of the dashboards themselves. We can give you this back to do your own additional deeper dives. The other analysis ready file that is brand new and just got released this past month is a course level analysis ready file. That's built on one row per course. And so you can really start looking into that, much like Godfrey was talking about. I love Godfrey. I don't know when algebra is exciting. I heard you mention it's not exciting in the morning. I might struggle with it in the nighttime as well. But suffice it to say, if you wanted to look at that on a course level and figure out what particular courses might be barriers for students, you could dig into it that way to boot. So with that, there's many, I've seen a lot of things come through the chat, although I cannot actually read them while I was presenting and had my screen sharing up.
Maybe it makes sense. I've actually been tracking the questions and trying to answer
Great.
a few of them. So maybe it would make sense. I'm thinking for this session, we've got 22 minutes left. So I'm actually going to nix the breakouts because I think it's very important that we get all questions answered. So what I would like to do is go through a few of the questions that were raised in the chat just now. Then I want to actually turn it over to my colleague Nia Heidel for just a couple minutes on her experiences with data and how the PDP can help, and then reopen for questions until we close.
That'd be great.
So with that, there were a couple questions. If you take a look in the chat, there was one regarding degree audit and whether it's on the roadmap to be able to pull degree audit system to capture student progress data. I could see one use case, and Mr. Winfield, if you have any additional that you'd want to elaborate on your question, that'd be great. But one use case would be, of course, if we could say, all right, these students are 50%, 75% towards completing their program of study. Can that sort of segmentation be hit against the PDP so you can do visualizations on proximity to completion?
That is potential. And I say potential, it's actually one of the neat things. I'm not trying to be evasive. One of the neat things about being on this project is that in many ways, even as mature as it is, we're still building this plane while we're flying it. And that is to say that we're taking information from all of our early adopters, both our institutions as well as our third-party partners, and saying what else was going to benefit, as many people and as many institutions as possible. So benchmarking came out of that, right? Benchmarking is, hey, if you've got all this stuff, can we add benchmarking as well? The course level AR file is another example of that. We're currently in discussions right now with, is there a way for us to capture program and major, type related data elements that if it can't be built into the dashboard, can at least be included in, say, the analysis ready files, right? And so that is an ongoing conversation as this sort of just continues to get more and more robust for users.
Excellent. Regarding benchmarking, there was a couple questions on that. One was, can the PDP provide customization related to benchmarking? And, in iPads, for example, they send you those, pre-built benchmarking reports. You've got Carnegie classifications. People might want to do regional. What's present and what's roadmap?
So right now, the short answer is, what we have is what we have, right? Having said that, again, building this thing out, we have heard the market speak loud and clear, and that is that, hey, we'd love to be able to customize our benchmarking list of schools, and right now we're at about 430 plus institutions. By this time next year, we expect to be more around 1,000 institutions nationally. And so the more institutions we have, the more the benchmarking is going to be, more and more powerful. Having heard the market sort of speak, though, of saying, hey, we'd like to customize that is something we're trying to work through right now and identify a solution for so that we can eventually build that in. I don't want to offer false promises. I would guess at the earliest that'd be a year away, but that is something we're currently trying to figure out if we can offer. Keep in mind that as the as the National Student Clearinghouse, like our job number one is to keep and honor your data's security and safety, right? And so being able to do that, that's sort of job one for the clearinghouse.
There were a couple questions about submission, and I'm going to try to boil it down to like 3 different prongs, right? So one is about the student information systems, whether there's anything that's preferable or difficult, be it Genzabar, Banner, Oracle, PeopleSoft, that sort of thing. Second, is there a limit to how far back you can go? So for example, if somebody's thinking about the 8-year cohorts that they send to iPads for the outcomes measure survey, could they go back 8 years in the PDP? Is there any sort of ways to like hit against that? And then finally, like, what are you seeing in terms of timeframes for like submission, any sort of deadlines to around? So that's sources for submission, timelines for submission, how far back on submission?
Yeah, you just threw the kitchen sink at me. By the way, Ebony, sorry, I didn't mean to offend about the algebra. So sorry. And everyone else that's apparently who's a big Euclid fan. Actually, that would be geometry, wouldn't it? All right. So in terms of submission, yes, there are tons of different student information systems out there. One of the things that whenever I talk to an institution that's considering joining the PDP, I tell them step one is to visit our website and take a look at the data submission guide, right? We all know that nationally people are all over the map in terms of their data capacity, their maturity, how many people they have in their IR shops and the like. So step one is always to look at the data submission guide, ask yourself, do we have these various data elements, right? Some of the things some data elements are required, some are required, but you could write unknown, and some are going to be optional. Realizing that maybe you're an institution that only started collecting first generation status 2 years ago, but you want to submit 5 or 6 years worth of historic data, right? And so we give you a little bit of that flexibility built in. There are a couple different ways to submit data, and we're constantly looking to improve that. So historically, the way data has been submitted is through a flat file, through a secure file transfer process, right? A CSV file. And you're still welcome to do that, right? And we can provide you different assistance to sort of map that data extraction into a file that you can submit to the PDP. The first time out, again, you can submit, you can go back up to 8 years if you want to submit that much data. Many schools are typically ranging right around that 3 to 5. So the first time you submit that, that's the first heavy lift. Once you build out that data submission file, though, our early adopters tell us like, yeah, it was a big lift the first time, right? It took us about 40 hours worth of programming and identifying where we needed to pull stuff from. But once they built that out, they knew exactly where to get it each and every time, and it was a much quicker process. So that's option one. Option two is using a generic API that we just ended up sort of creating that you might be able to sort of graft into and onto your student information system. That was also derived, if you happen to be a colleague or banner school, by Ellucian. Ellucian is sort of seeing where the writing on the wall of where this notion of data usage and especially transparency is going, and knowing that they, serve over 50% of institutions nationally. They built out a customized API mechanism to essentially extract data from your student information systems, from colleague and banner, and directly, dump it right into the clearinghouse for the PDPs. So that's essentially meant to be an easy button. In order to take advantage of that, if you happen to be a colleague or banner institution, the only sort of step that you would need to take is connect with Ellucian and switch over to the Ethos platform, essentially their new sort of cloud mechanism. And so that's essentially some other sort of programming that needs to be done. But I'm told that that's a free sort of upgrade that they are offering. But I think it does involve a little bit of coding to make that switch. So those are the three sort of primary ways right now. And so we are constantly, again, just looking to find ways to ease that burden and make things a little bit easier for folks. I said timing, how often you submit data, about we suggest 2 times a year, but there's 4 different windows that are available. Ideal right now we're in sort of what we call an effective data window, although there's not really a deadline. We want it to be effective to your most up-to-date submission around degree verification, enrollment verification. That way you get the most up-to-date snapshot. So right now, our institutions are submitting their fall semester data. That's all be getting processed over the next couple of weeks. And then by the end of this month, early April, they'll get back their analysis ready files and dashboards. And so that's one of the main sort of avenues that institutions are using this data in as real time as possible to actually make a difference with students while they're still enrolled, right? Before they potentially leave over the summer months.
Excellent. Ken, I want to throw one more question your way, and then I want to turn it over to my colleague Nia Heidel for a minute. So really quick, we've had a couple questions about price. Can you speak, in broad terms about the NSC pricing model, and then, bonus points if you can link it back to what Godfrey had mentioned earlier about financial assistance?
Yeah, so I think I'm sharing my screen again, and really, the vast majority of the clearinghouse services are free. Building out something that is as large as the PDP, has been, we've had to essentially, create a pricing model that covers some of our operational costs with that. But as a nonprofit educational partner, we are still looking to keep this as nominal a fee as possible. So it's free from the clearinghouse's perspective, through the remainder of this fiscal year. Starting July 2021, what you see there is a tiered pricing structure. It's an annual fee that's based on your prior year IPEDS reported full-time equivalency enrollment, right? So if you're an institution that has less than 4,000 students, it's only $26.95 annually. And if you had more than 10,000 students, it's never going to be more than $39.95. And that's just the sort of the sticker shock from the clearinghouse's perspective. Although Godfrey, I think, could speak to a little bit more that the sort of pricing that they were offering if you join part of their IDEA, the Insights Data Equity Academy, that they were going to be subsidizing that cost the first year by $2,000 and by $1,000 the second year.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So really quick, before I turn it over to Nia, one thing that I also just want to mention with CCA and with pricing is that there is going to be, the subsidization from both of us. And in addition, we want to make sure that we keep this conversation going and try to create a working group of data leads across the partners who are on this call, as well as across the community. So it's going to be, if you wouldn't mind just taking 30 seconds, either right now or right after the call, to shoot me an email. I'm going to throw it in the chat. If you would like to be part of a working group that explores this, because as we're going forward and seeing much more adoption and uptake around the PDP, it's going to be very critical to not only share those best practices, but there's lots of questions in the chat on how to integrate this with other tools, be it reporting, be it advising, be it with your student success reforms, right? And not only do we have this community, but CCA is built around the Alliance, and lots of our changes happen not just that we promote, not just at the college and university level, but at the state level too. And so we'd want to make sure that you're linked within your state and your region to others who are also using this, because this would not only help with the sort of the benchmarking, but also with the trading notes and getting all the minds and the thought leadership around data and decision support together. So, if this is of interest to you, please, take 10 seconds, shoot me a note so we can start moving on that. Nia, can you describe what your experience has been with data in your prior role, and how this sort of thing would have helped?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. And I work with Complete College America as the Vice President for Alliance Engagement and Institutional Transformation. And so we really, in the role that I have, the PDP, I think, really is a significant game changer, because it's going to democratize the data and allow institutions, specifically, I think, smaller institutions who have lower staffing capacity, to be able to give broader access to data and metrics, and allow people to be empowered to look at the data and be able to make real-time decisions. I previously was at an HBCU. My colleagues from Dillard University are actually on the call. And, with the institution, because we were so small, oftentimes we have one person who is running reports. And because of that, there isn't a lack of desire to respond to every need, but the capacity just doesn't really always allow for things to happen as immediate as you need it. Because sometimes, we have these last minute requests and ideas. And this, I think, will really be able to give people the tools that they need to be able to move forward with this. So I am very, very excited. The other reason why I'm excited is because I think since smaller institutions and specifically HBCUs have not had the ability sometimes with the infrastructure to be able to compile the breadth that is going to be available in this database, it will allow a different peer group comparison and be able to really figure out what the trends are with our students in our specific circumstance. So we at CCA, along with our partners that we've had, so thank you all very much for all of our partners with SACSCOC and UNCF and Frontier Set. All of us together are going to support this. And the reason why, when we brought this group together, we were very intentional with thinking about who do we want to have this conversation, because we know that all these things are important. It's important, how does it work? It's important, how does it cost? It's important, how does this help build institutional capacity? And how do you use this in order to improve, like the things that Ed was talking about, institutional effectiveness, and even financial stability. All of this works. And how does it work with accreditation? Because, I was in the SACSCOC region, and we know that accreditation is important. And it's not just about the numbers and checking the boxes, because I believe that people really want to do a good job. And this is going to allow people to not only be focused on the reporting, but also the reason behind the reporting. And so that's why we're really, really just excited. And I am over the moon. You can't tell, but I am over the moon excited that so many people have joined us. And CCA is going to also have a project where we're working with 10 to 15 HBCUs specifically on this onboarding process with the PDP, and with how does that translate into institutional transformation and building institutional data maturity and capacity. So if you are interested in being one of the 10 to 15 institutions that we're working with on this project, and we will have some support for this project, then we would like you to really contact us. Charles is going to put his email in the chat, and so he'll be the point of contact for this. And we're hoping that you will embrace this. Change is difficult. I know that. I don't like change. I love structure and order. But this is the way it's going. So people who can tell their story by the numbers are going to be advantaged. And our president, Dr. Watson Spiva, always says, either you're at the table or you're on the menu. And so having the data provides you a seat at the table and not, a dollar sign in front of your name on the menu. So I hope that all of you are willing and are interested in joining us on this journey. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Charles, because I think we have about 5 minutes for questions and wrap up.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That was really helpful. So yeah, we've got five minutes for questions and wrap up. I do want to point out that all of our panelists are still here also for any questions on their remarks more broadly about data governance, integration, using it to support reforms. We can also do more questions specific around the PDP, but please don't hold back. And if we didn't capture your question from the chat, I think that we're caught up, but please, if we've missed it, please chime in or put it in the chat once more. All right, we've got a question for Dr. No. How do we go about joining PDP IDEA?
So that's a good question. So send me an email and I will follow up with you on that, send you some information in addition to registration link to join. So I've placed my email in the chat and twice. And of course, you can reach out to Charles or Ken. They'll be able to get you my email in case you didn't see it. But that's how you can get in touch with SACSCOC and talk about IDEA. Thank you.
Excellent. We have a question. Did you provide the contact information for the onboarding project? So if that's regards to CCA, that would be my email. With regards to IDEA, that would be Dr. No. I want to make sure that I'm getting the question. Did I miss another group? Because we have talked about several initiatives on this call. Okay, great. Other questions? Okay, well, I would like to thank everybody for joining. I'm going to stay on the line in case there's questions that you want to ask when maybe not 65 other people are present virtually. But I think that this was a very informative session. You'll be receiving a follow-up for feedback on the session, as well as the recording of the session. Again, thank you so much. If you've got any questions, you've got the contact information in the chat. And with that, I would like to go ahead and adjourn the session.